And welcome everyone to the latest in the James River Association's webinar series, Policy, Politics, and a Pandemic. I'm Anna Killius, Policy Analyst for JRA. And tonight, on the eve of our state legislature gaveling in for the 2021 General Assembly, we're introducing you to our advocacy program. At JRA, our mission is to protect the James and connect watershed communities to the benefits of a healthy river. Each winter, we advance that mission by providing a voice for the James River within the halls of Virginia's state legislature, advocating for programs and policies that we think will deliver cleaner water to communities throughout our watershed. A few quick reminders as we get started. First, please ensure that your microphone is muted whenever you aren't speaking. This will ensure that everyone is able to hear the presentations. Second, we will be using the chat box throughout the hour, so please familiarize yourself with where it is and feel free to send a quick hello to test it out right now. As we move through the webinar, we will pause periodically to answer questions that you place in the chat and to invite you to unmute your microphones to ask questions in person. And finally, we will be recording this webinar. I hopefully will have it recording now, and sending a follow-up email with some of the website links and resources that we'll be talking about later this evening. So keep an eye out. Over the next hour, we will share a bit about what we expect this General Assembly session to look like, some of the policies that JRA will be following throughout session, and the ways that you can get involved to share your story for clean water. But first, we are delighted to be joined by Delegate Betsy Carr, who represents Virginia's 69th District, which includes portions of the city of Richmond on either side of the James River and a majority of the James River Park system. First elected to the House of Delegates in 2009, Delegate Carr serves on the Appropriations, Transportation, General Laws, and Rules Committees. She also serves on the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission, the Commission on Employee Retirement Security and Pension Reform, the Joint Commission of Administrative Rules, the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Commission, and the Virginia Housing Commission. In addition to all of this work within the General Assembly, Delegate Carr served for 16 years as Outreach Director at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in downtown Richmond, and her commitment to educating Richmond's children runs deep. She is the founder of the MICA Initiative, which connects over 120 faith communities with 25 city elementary schools to provide more than 1,700 mentors, tutors, and volunteers. From 2006 to 2010, she represented the city's 5th district on Richmond School Board. But here at JRA, we know Delegate Carr as a dear friend to our work and to our river, and she has kindly accepted our invitation to join us for a few minutes ahead of the very busy weeks to come to share her thoughts going into this legislative session and her tips on how constituents can be heard. So Delegate Carr, I just want to say we definitely appreciate your being here, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you for that lovely introduction and for having me on your meeting tonight. And first of all, I want to thank all the James River Association members and enthusiasts for all their work and their advocacy that's taking care of our jewel of the area. I'm so excited to be here and talk with you. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have about the assembly that starts tomorrow. We will have our usual session at 12. However, after tomorrow, all the meetings will be at 4 o'clock. I encourage you to please go online, and if there is a committee you want to participate in, you want to provide witness for bills or so forth, if you want to find bills, just go on the website for the LIS, for the General Assembly. The one thing about having a remote session, it is a little different, and we're not in the Capitol or downtown. However, there's some advantages such that we have more opportunities for participation, having it online. And if somebody wanted to not have to get up at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock to get down to a particular committee meeting at 4 o'clock and at 7 o'clock in the morning, they're able to do that, can show up and see the either participate or watch a meeting online. I'm very excited about this year. I have several bills. You may be familiar with the styrofoam, banning the styrofoam eating containers that we had last year. The bill is a reenactment, which means that we'll work on it again this year. And for those of you who are interested, we need to please show up at our meeting tomorrow afternoon, right after one of the first committees that are up. And we'll be having the ag meeting. We'll be having meetings after the session tomorrow. It's on the website exactly time, but it'll be like after 12:31. And so if you would like to testify on behalf of that styrofoam bill, we would love to have you. I know that people say, oh, that it's not going to make that much difference, that it is, although maybe styrofoam food containers are not that numerous in terms of all of the recycling material. They do create more trash or litter than a lot of other things. So it's very important to start moving them out. So very happy that this passed last year. We're going to get it through this year so that it becomes a permanent regulation. And I think it would be one big step that we can take toward our environment. One other thing that I'm very happy about is last year we had put in a budget amendment for underwater archaeology. As you probably know, Virginia does not have underwater archaeology, although it did until 1990. It is one of the only coastal states that doesn't have underwater archaeology, and something like more than 10% of our land of Virginia is under the water. In the code, we have been tasked with, we are supposed to inventory and take care of our underwater resources, the archaeology and so forth. And we really need underwater archaeologists in order to do that. The good news is that last year we passed this and it was successful. It was in the budget. However, as you know, with COVID coming along, this was taken out, was unallotted in the budget because of the COVID demands and so forth. However, we're putting it again for this year because it is so important for our resources. I don't know if any of you have seen that the museum, the sunken treasures at the museum about the Egyptian. So yesterday they had a whole thing. They spent in their curator's talk, they talked about how Virginia, the importance of Virginia's archaeology, and related it to the Egyptian. We have our own treasures here. So I was happy to see that. Those are a couple of things that are really important that are coming up. But again, tomorrow we're having the vote on the polystyrene, and a little bit later we will have the budget amendments. This year, because we're having such a shortened, intense session because it is remote, we will probably have less legislation than we usually do because it's just going to take more time to get through with the remote. That doesn't mean that we're not going to get done whatever we need to get done, and things that maybe need to move forward in a certain direction, we may just begin taking a footstep in that area, whereas we won't do the whole massive issue. We're going to save that things that take a little bit more time for discernment and discussion and going back and forth. We're going to save that for the next session, where we'll have time to give those issues justice. I'm open to any questions if folks have about either the session coming up or legislation that we will have. But thank you so much for having me. And again, thank you for all that you do for the James River.
Well, if anyone wants to come off mute and ask a question, feel free.
This is John Rosa Pepe. How does budgeting look, or when will the latest figures be in, so you can figure out what type budget you'll be able to deal with this year?
We've had a budget that came out in mid-December. The suggestion is that we will need to have a reforecast in the middle of January, which is right in the middle of the session. I think in one way people were pleased that it wasn't quite as bad as they had thought it would be, but that means we're going to have to readjust things in the middle. So to answer your question, the reforecast will be in the middle of January, and we that doesn't mean that we aren't going to start on budget work right away, because we're going to have the shortened session. It will be either 30, probably 30 days, maybe move to 45 with the governor's adjustment, but we're going to need to get a lot done in a short amount of time. So we've already been told in appropriations that we're going to start on our appropriations meeting right away, our subcommittee meeting. We've already had some subcommittee meetings. We'll continue to do that. So those will all be underway, and we'll be moving forward fairly rapidly with those. Does that answer your question?
I'll ask a question unless he has a follow-up. In addition to the two items you mentioned, the underwater archaeology as well as the styrofoam food containers, are there any kind of longer going issues that aren't being addressed this session, but you might anticipate being a bigger deal in the next one?
In the future?
Yeah.
We have a number of, obviously the biggest thing that we will deal with will be the budget. It's this year and any year. So having the privilege of serving on appropriations, we will have a lot of budget amendments, some things that the governor put in that we're all supportive of, and we want to, some things that the Democratic caucus, for instance, wants to include in its priorities in the budget. So there are things like water resources and things like the Chesapeake Bay and so forth. Those things you may see in the budget, putting in for this year or for the second year of the biennium, which would be the 21-22 session. So there will be things in that budget that will perhaps set up things for the future.
Delegate Carr, I guess one of the questions I always like to ask is, do you have any tips when we're reaching out to our representatives? How can we make sure that our message is getting across and that we're communicating the things that they need to hear?
That's a very good question. I think that although we're having remote, and I think that most delegates I know and senators and so forth are still going to be seeing constituents at a fairly good clip. They will be, instead of going into the Pocahontas building, you will be meeting on Zoom. I think that the best way to stay in touch, I'll tell you two things. The way of, if you need to talk to a representative because you see a bill coming up and you want to make sure that your voice is heard, support or opposition to it, call the delegate or the senator. There will be we have a kind of call center, and those people will take the messages and people will get their messages at the end of the day. If you need something more urgently, if you want to meet with a delegate or a senator, or there's something really urgent, I would suggest sending a email. That would be the best way to stay in touch. And again, I think that most people are, we know what it's, the challenges that the Zoom meetings present, but we're going to be, everybody is meeting a number of times Zoom. I mean, like I've just had Zoom meetings all day today. For 2 weeks, we've been meeting with constituents and concerned folks. So I don't think that there'll be a big cutoff in being able to talk to constituents. As far as advocacy is concerned, you all do a great job. I would suggest that, you know, sometimes we get messages that they're kind of created by, they're generated and they're all the same. I would say if you're going to do that, if you want to use the content of that message, I would just do a little something to make sure that that message is personal from you. Because if a delegate or senator sees the same thing coming in 500, you know, say 50 times, the email all say this exact thing, they're going to treat it like that. However, if you take the time or attention just to put a little something personal in there about why this is important to you, that makes a big difference. And again, I would say just keep on the lookout for legislation that you're very concerned about.
Excellent advice. And hopefully we'll be giving everyone some tools on how to do that, and stressing the importance of really personalizing the story. I know you have to head over to your next.
Thank you. Well, I want to make sure to answer any questions that anybody has, any concerns you have. And all right, thanks. And please, let me give you it's delegate.carr@betsycarr.org. And I will also give you my mobile number, which is 804-986-6852.
Well, I hope everyone got that because I wrote it down.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you all for what you're doing, and look forward to continue communicating with you and working with you to keep our James River what it needs to be.
Fantastic. I'm sure you'll be hearing from us, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, bear with me as I try to share my screen one more time. All right. So we're going to move ahead in our program for today and turn to what we know about what's coming in the General Assembly. And we'll do that with a bit of Legislation 101. Thankfully, Delegate Carr kind of kicked things off, so some of this will be familiar. So to kind of take it a step back and really start from the beginning, Virginia's legislative body, the General Assembly, consists of 2 chambers, which are both currently controlled by the Democratic Party. The House of Delegates has 100 members elected to 2-year terms. The Speaker of the House, Eileen Fillercorn, presides over the chamber, along with Majority Leader Charnel Herring. They both set the agenda of the House. The Senate has 40 members, each elected to 4-year terms. The Lieutenant Governor presides over the chamber and casts a tie-breaking vote when necessary, and the President pro tempore, Senator Luis Lucas, steps in when the Lieutenant Governor is absent. The Democratic majority within the chamber is led by Senator Dick Zaslow. Until now, the floor of both of those chambers looked a lot like the image on the left. The House and Senate meet in separate rooms on opposite sides of the Virginia Capitol building. But this year, to protect members and staff from COVID-19, as you've heard, both chambers are going remote. The Senate will meet at the Science Museum of Virginia in a large open space that allows more room for social distancing. And the House will meet virtually using video conferencing. This won't be completely new to the legislators. They followed similar protocols during the special session of the General Assembly, which met and wrapped up in the fall. So let's look at the inner workings of the legislature, and we'll get some help from our friend Bill. You may recognize him from Schoolhouse Rock. Senators and delegates introduce legislation in their chamber for consideration. For our purposes, we'll assume that Bill here was introduced by a delegate and is moving through the House. All bills are sent to committees for discussion and amendment. If a committee approves of a bill, it will head to the floor for a full vote. But if not, the bill dies in the committee and its journey is over for the year. So this is a critically important moment in the life of any bill. You may have been preparing for months, building support for what you think is a genius idea. And within a week of session, your bill has been set aside for the year and your work on that is done. So that's why it's incredibly important for constituents and advocates to reach out to committee members ahead of their deliberations to make sure they know how we feel about that particular policy. So usually that means we are dropping into members' offices for a quick 5 to 10 minute chat, catching them in hallways as they move from meeting to meeting, or bending their ear just before they head onto the House or Senate floor for votes. None of those tactics are a good idea in the midst of a public health crisis. The cramped hallways and small office spaces within the Capitol building and the Pocahontas building are often crammed with constituents and lobbyists each day, with no room for social distancing. So this year, the legislative offices will be closed to the public. The delegates and senators may not spend much time, if any, in their office anyway, because they'll be working remotely. So this means that they are generally turning to virtual meetings, as Delegate Carr said, and emails to keep in touch with their constituents. For committee meetings, we'll have to sign up on time and in advance in order to get a moment to testify via Zoom, or we will need to submit written comments ahead of time so that we can be sure that they're available for committee members to read. So let's say our bill has made it out of committee and is on its way to the House floor. Well, once it's there, it's going to be read 3 times on 3 consecutive days. On day number 2, delegates offer amendments to the bill for consideration. On day number 3, the amended bill receives an up or down vote. If a majority of the delegates approve, our bill is off to the Senate to repeat the whole process over again. But if they don't, it's game over for that bill. Bills have to make it through both chambers of the legislature, one chamber at a time. At the halfway point of session, a day called crossover, the General Assembly basically clears the decks of everything that didn't make it out of the first chamber, sending those bills to the scrap heap for the year. So this is another major challenge for every piece of legislation and for every advocate. If your bill didn't make it past crossover, your agenda for the rest of the session could be pretty sparse. While some state legislatures meet all year long, Virginia has a part-time legislature. Our elected officials come to Richmond for a limited number of days at the beginning of each calendar year to debate the state budget and pass legislation. During even-numbered years, like 2020, session lasts 60 consecutive days, including weekends and holidays. These are budget years, when a brand new 2-year state budget bill is proposed by the governor and passed by the legislature. But in odd-numbered years, like 2021, session typically lasts only 45 days. Instead of debating a brand new budget bill, the governor and the legislature consider amendments to the existing budget. But partisan politics are in play this year when it comes to our calendar. According to the state constitution, short sessions in odd years are actually only 30 days long, and they may be extended to 45 days if 2/3 of the members of both chambers agree. Given how much legislators want to accomplish and how complicated budget negotiations can be, the chambers usually vote for an extension. But this year, the Republican caucus has announced that they believe 30 days is long enough. The General Assembly just wrapped up a lengthy special session to address the pandemic's budget impacts and the public calls for policing and criminal justice reform. But Democrats contest that there is much more work to do, and they have cited a packed agenda with pandemic relief and more progressive policies. The governor has indicated that if Republicans don't come around, he may call for a special session that adds those 15 extra days after the regular session wraps. So we have a lot of unanswered questions about what this session will actually look like and how long it will be. So what does that mean for us? Well, we have to prepare for a 30-day sprint because it's not clear if those 15 extra days will be there and what they will look like. It also means that crossover is coming incredibly quickly. For 60-day sessions, we have about a month to get our bills successfully out of one chamber and onto the other. In 45-day sessions, that's 3 weeks. But this year we're expecting 2 weeks, which doesn't give us a lot of time to get up to speed on all of the legislation that's been proposed, take positions on the bills that we need to, and communicate those positions to legislators. So to review, here are our main challenges this year. Advocacy is going virtual and potentially at the speed of light. Both chambers are going remote in some sense. No face-to-face meetings, no in-person lobbying. We'll need to tune in to floor votes and committee meetings online, make sure we sign up to testify on time in advance, and work hard to reach legislators through emails and virtual meetings ahead of time. We may have only 2 weeks to keep the good bills alive and prevent bad bills from gaining traction. And if session is only 30 days long, crossover comes as early as January 28th. We have to stay nimble because negotiations between the two parties, the two chambers, and the legislature and the governor could mean that the rules and the deadlines change quickly on us. This is all uncharted territory, and we're learning as we go, the legislators, the staff, and the advocates. But even in a challenging year, we know it's an opportunity to secure funding and policies that will change the James for the better. Before we start exploring what JRA's agenda is for this 2021 General Assembly, let's pause here for any questions that you have on what we've covered so far.
See, Anna, I think I have a quick question, perhaps.
Yeah.
You mentioned that part of kind of needing to be so nimble and ready to move quickly is not knowing yet what bills are going to be presented. So when do you learn that for the first time? When do you discover what kinds of legislation are being proposed?
Good question. So the bills are kind of appearing as we speak, right? The way that part of the process works is that legislators work with the staff to write the bills and get them placed on the Legislative Information Service system. It takes staff a long time to kind of parse through all of the different bills that legislators want to introduce. And so the bills kind of just show up on a rolling basis, basically last week and into this week. And hopefully we'll see everything up on this system by the end of this week so that we can be aware of what we're working with. So we're currently walking through the bills that we've seen, the bills we know are coming, and we're kind of staying vigilant and watching those websites for when new bills pop up.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Any other questions about this part of the process?
Quick question. As far as, are there any carryover bills from last session, or how does that work?
So carryover bills, when a bill comes up in the even year, right? So General Assembly kind of goes over 2 years. A bill can be carried forward into the next year. As I understand it, the committees need to take up that bill again before the regular session starts and kind of keep it alive in order to move it into the odd year. The bills that we've been watching, that didn't happen. So for the most part, all of those bills are gone, and their legislators, the patrons, have either reintroduced them anew with a new number, or chosen not to introduce them this year. Something I didn't cover is that each legislator has a limited number of bills that they can offer this year because they know that time is short. So some of the bills that we may have thought were coming up have been kind of pushed out just because of lack of time. Deadline for submitting bills, that's a good question. That happened in December. There's a deadline for legislators to get their language to the drafters so that they have time to turn it into the official version that's going to end up on the website. And Nancy, your question, when does Natural Resources Committee meet? We will get to that in the third section. So stay tuned and I'll make sure that I include that in our information. All right, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jamie to take us into our agenda for the year.
Thanks, Anna. Excellent job. And good evening, everybody. My name is Jamie Bronchio. I'm the James River Keeper and Senior Advocacy Manager with the James River Association. I'm going to walk you through just a handful of slides now that you've got some background on how session works, sort of the special circumstances that we're facing this year, and introduce you a bit to our team members and to how we work as a team, how we work with communities, and then start to go into some of the goals that we have for this session that fit within our mission as an organization. So first off, a little bit about me. I've been with the James River Association since 2012. Started off as the River Keeper, and we've grown into this really fantastic team that we now have with Anna, who has a law degree, great background working in Washington, D.C. with some legislators, and is just an excellent voice for the James River at the General Assembly and in a number of other matters that we work on throughout the year. Anna is really a fantastic anchor for us during session. The other photo you see there on the right is Erin Riley. Erin is our staff scientist, and so she is, no surprise, a scientist. She's got a background in a number of different water quality monitoring, marsh monitoring, a lot of those kinds of sciences that are particularly helpful for us at James River Association. She's even got some expertise in mapping and that sort of data management skills. So combined, we try to work as a team to stay in tune with what really are the biggest issues affecting the health of the river throughout the year. And we try to be as nimble as possible to adapt and rise to those kinds of challenges that emerge to affect river health. So let's get more specific with that. Maybe slip to the next slide there. So we work across the watershed. And while there's really just 3 of us making up the primary team, we've got offices in Lynchburg, Richmond, and Williamsburg, and we've got a lot of staff at the James River Association that do all kinds of things, from restoration to outreach, education. And so we try to represent a lot of that work through our advocacy program at the General Assembly and some of our other work. And I'm still seeing our advocacy team slide. We could jump to the next slide, which is, here we go. Thank you. So for Anna, Erin, and I, our job is really to be a guardian for the river and to be a voice for the river, particularly with our advocacy work. So as Anna said, we've got a short session this year, and it's particularly short because of the circumstances of the pandemic. But at the same time, the session is always an incredible opportunity to jump ahead and to make some significant progress in terms of policy in a short period of time. And so our job is really to do all we can to position ourselves as staff with the latest information, to know what bills are likely to move, to try to push bills ourselves, support other bills that may be supported by our partners or those in the communities. And so there's really a lot of good that can be done in this little bit of time. And that's why we're so excited that you're here with us this evening to be advocates as a voice for the James, and to sort of do your part to speak up and support some of this work. I can't stress enough how important it is that you are here and that you're willing to get involved in this work. It's one thing that we have staff tracking a lot of these issues, but we really can't be truly successful without community members, supporters like yourselves that are willing to send in comments, go to committee meetings, and really support this work. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. Some examples of why this is so important. This is just a snapshot of a handful of the things that we know went through the General Assembly last year. It was a pretty special year. We had a lot of bills move, and we are still in sort of a backlog of generally good policies that came out of the last General Assembly that are now being implemented by a lot of our state agencies. But here's just a few examples of those things. So first off, SB 1064, this was a bill that wasn't necessarily, I think, expected by everyone, but it brought a lot of the important stakeholders to the table to talk about a longstanding issue, which is Richmond's combined sewer overflow system. It's unfortunately a relic from the past that we have a very old system in Richmond that causes sewer overflows periodically directly into the river when we have heavy rainstorms. And Richmond has worked hard to address that issue over time through wastewater treatment upgrades, through upgrading pipes and infrastructure throughout the city. But what this bill does that's special is it put a deadline to when that work needs to be completed. So we have an idea now in law of when this fix is going to be completed so that our river here in Richmond is truly swimmable and fishable, and we are not having to worry about sewage going into the river. HB 586, this is something that we're in the midst of working on now as a team at JRA, is to help work with the Department of Health and advise them on this study of PFAS. PFAS is referred to as an emerging contaminant. You've probably heard this phrase, forever chemical. PFAS, unfortunately, are one of these chemicals that are in a lot of products, a lot of household products, clothing, Teflon, and they've been linked to some very serious health concerns in different states around the United States. So this study is going to help Virginia understand sort of the state of PFAS in our water supplies around Virginia, and to consider how that can translate into a potential standard to protect drinking water and to make sure we're protecting our people from this pollutant. So really a critical step forward to understand this risk. And one more item here, the last bullet, funding. I can't stress enough how important it is to fund the ongoing work to restore the health of the James River. If you've been tracking James River Association for very long, or if you've been tracking the Chesapeake Bay for very long, you know that this has been a long-term narrative playing out to restore the health of the James and to restore the health of the Chesapeake Bay. And since 2010, we've been in this very intense effort in Virginia, as well as across the Chesapeake Bay watershed, to restore our waterways going into America's estuary, the Chesapeake Bay. We have come a long way. So today we're in 2020, we are entering the third and final phase of the Chesapeake Bay cleanup plan, which is targeted to end in 2025. And we need funding to continue good work that's going to result in good water quality. And you can head to the next slide. Anna, thank you. So what does it take to keep our progress going? This is the #1 goal that we wanted to start off with this evening. Anna and I are going to walk through a few more to help pinpoint you towards what we're really focused on this session. But funding is key. It's very important. Every year, we get an idea of what is needed to continue implementing practices on the landscape through needs assessments and some internal documents that we get from our state agencies, from our soil and water conservation districts. They help us understand where is money needed for wastewater upgrades, or where is money needed for stream restorations or pervious pavement, or other urban practices in our cities to reduce stormwater runoff, or as well as on farm practices, fencing cows out of rivers, doing things on farmland that are going to result in better water quality and keeping the soil in place. We can put a dollar figure on that based on those needs assessments. And so with that information in hand, we have to make sure every year that the General Assembly is continuing to invest in that work. And because of the investments that have been made to date, we've seen a lot of progress. Go to the next slide. This is a slide that may look familiar if you viewed our State of the James report. Those graphs in each corner represent stormwater, top left, agriculture in the bottom left, and then wastewater pollution in the bottom right. Those are the three major areas that we are targeting in Virginia and across the Chesapeake Bay watershed to reduce nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. Those are the main pollutants that cause algal blooms, that cause low dissolved oxygen. Those are the things that we're really focused on for the Bay and the James River cleanup effort. And if there's one message you take away from this slide, it's that where we've invested the resources and the energy, we've seen the most improvement. You can see wastewater has been very effective. Where we've invested resources, we've seen a lot of improvements. And that means that plants have been upgraded to reduce the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus they're discharging into the river. Same is true on stormwater and agricultural landscapes, but to a lesser extent, because we just have not seen the same level of investment. So we have more work there to do, but can't stress enough that continuing to invest in clean water through best management practices on the landscape through these three areas is critically important. And that's one of the things we're going to ask our advocates to help support us with in our 2021 agenda.
Unmute myself. I'm going to take back over for goal number 2. So for our second goal for this session, we need to secure investments for state agencies that monitor, protect, and enforce our clean water safeguards. So what does that look like? First, we're urging the General Assembly to provide $60,000 per year for PFAS sampling at Virginia's drinking water sources. So as Jamie mentioned in an earlier slide, we were able to pass legislation that requires the Virginia Department of Health to sample up to 50 different water works and water sources to look for this chemical and understand its occurrence within our drinking water currently. Unfortunately, there was no funding attached to that legislation. And so the Department of Health has had to kind of look for available funding, and they have found some limited federal dollars to help them get started. But if we can secure some additional state funds, we can improve the study that's already being planned and do multiple rounds of sampling at each of the waterworks and to look at different times of year and see if that makes a difference in the levels that may be there. And we can use a more sophisticated test that detects more types of PFAS chemicals so that when we do this, we're finding the best data that we can. Second, we're asking the General Assembly to reverse years of budget cuts that have been made to Virginia's Department of Environmental Quality. During the 2020 session, legislators agreed to invest an additional $12 million for monitoring and protecting our air, water, and land resources. But as Delegate Carr explained when she talked about her budget amendment, when the pandemic hit, the state's budget forecast became very unclear and cuts were made to ensure we didn't spend more than we could afford at the time. Fortunately, our revenues have remained better than we feared, and many of those budget cuts can be reversed. We think that this is one of those. This funding will expand the agency's ability to enforce our environmental protections with a particular focus on the vulnerable frontline communities that have disproportionately felt the effects of polluted air, water, and soil to date. Even during a pandemic, we know our natural resources need to remain a priority for Virginia. We've seen over the past year, access to clean air and clean water are critical to public health. And each day, more Virginians are relying on these green spaces for peace of mind. And our last goal. So advocacy doesn't just involve writing bills and budget amendments and getting them passed. We have to be ready to respond to the ideas that are put forward by others. So we support the proposals we think will help the James. We suggest improvements to bills that we think could do more or do better. And then when we can't reach consensus or compromise, we oppose those measures that we think could set the health of the river back. So for now, this is just a snapshot of some of the legislative proposals we're paying attention to. Some of these, we haven't seen the official language yet, but we've talked to partners. We think they could be worthy of support. So we're reviewing details, and when the time's right, we'll let legislators know about our position when they're up for consideration. So stay tuned. You may hear from us on some of these if we need help and we need your support to get them across the finish line. So to sum up kind of our charge for this General Assembly, we're securing resources that we need to get the good work done. We know what we need to do to reduce polluted runoff from farmland and from city streets. We know that our wastewater treatment facilities do good work when we invest in them. And there are plenty of wastewater facilities within the James River that could improve with some modern technology capable of removing more pollution from their wastewater. We know that there are state agencies facing funding gaps that are hampering their ability to protect the health of our environment and our communities from things like PFAS contamination. So during this short session, we're concentrating our attention on those priorities, really keeping an eye on making sure that we have the funding we need to get this work done, but staying vigilant for other policies that come up for discussion. So I'll pause again here for more questions before we get to the final piece of the puzzle, how you can help. Yeah, Andrew.
Hey, in Jamie's presentation, there was a number, and I think it was for agricultural runoff, that the agencies were funded at maybe half of what the request or what the need is to fulfill. I think I saw it somewhere in there. Is there a general census to, is this just there's only so many dollars problem, or is this an issue that there might be opposition? And if so, kind of what does that opposition generically sound like?
I think there's usually some pretty good consensus that money invested in these agricultural best management practices is well spent. I think it's a bipartisan issue to kind of invest in Virginia farmland and Virginia farmers when it does good work. So I think you're right. One of the bigger problem we have is whenever you move money from one pot to the other, you're taking it from someone. And so we know that there are 3 sectors that we need to push money towards. And sometimes we get asked, which of these 3 is the priority? They're all the priority. So we just do what we can to try to get them all funded. Any other questions before we, Jamie, did you have more to add? No?
No, well, you could probably comment more on this though, Anna, and just, it is historic what we achieved last year for ag in particular. We've been pushing for that high number year after year. And so we are, I say that as sort of like, a positive perspective. We are kind of making a dent because we've been beating this drum for a long time, and we had some record funding last year. Of course, pandemic happened after that and kind of went the other way, but legislators are sensitive to this, I think.
Okay. I'll take that as a cue that everyone wants to get to this part, how to get involved. So first, I want you to think about a couple of questions. And as you reflect on them, feel free to write your responses in the chat, but kind of a civic responsibility audit. Think about, did you vote during the last state election? And do you know when the next state election is coming up and who's going to be on the ballot? Do you know who represents you in the House of Delegates and the State Senate? And do you know how to reach your representatives and what your top 2 asks would be if you did? What would you ask them to do? So for most of us, if you're like me, these questions get increasingly more difficult, right? I know that I voted, I know kind of when the next one's coming up, but I may not be ready for questions 3 and 4. It's important to remember that our role in the democratic process doesn't end at the ballot box. Our senators and delegates, they need to understand our concerns and our opinions in order to make informed legislative decisions. So they need to hear from us to make sure they're representing our views. So here are a few tips to help you keep track of what's happening in the General Assembly and help you get involved. First, you can find your representatives at the state and congressional level at whosmy.virginiageneralassembly.gov. You just type in your address and it'll populate it with information about what district you're in. Let's see, we'll try the JRA address for our headquarters and see if that works. Great. So we have our delegate, we have our state senator. We can find their phone numbers pretty quickly. And we even have a link to their email address. This year, as you heard, legislators are encouraging constituents to email. That's the fastest way to get a response because they're going to have fewer staff members on site to answer those landlines. So another tip is to, when you find your legislator, find their website, sign up for their newsletters. That's the best way to figure out kind of what's on their mind, what they may be working on, and when they might have a town hall or a listening session scheduled that you can join. Another helpful resource is Virginia's Legislative Information System, which often we just call LIS. And you can find that at lis.virginia.gov. So on LIS, you can see all of the legislation as it's introduced, right? So bills and resolutions, you can click on all, it'll just show you all of them in order, in bill order. So just by number, that can be a little overwhelming. You can search by member, you can search by committee, subject, and check, whether they've passed or not. You can also see more about the individual members, and you can find information on the standing and on the committees themselves, right? So if you really care about the House Committee for Agriculture and Chesapeake and Natural Resources, like we do, you can see who is a member of that committee, right? Who are the key people to talk to when a bill gets put on their agenda. You can see when their meetings are generally occur. So we know theirs usually occur Wednesday at 1 p.m. And when those meetings pop up, you can find agendas on what's going to be up for discussion. So here we have tomorrow's meeting, a half hour after the House floor adjourns. There's a virtual meeting. You can click on that and find what they're going to be talking about. Oh, one more tip on LIS. This is probably the most important part of this website for me. And that is the meetings. So if you click on that link, you see all of the meetings that are planned for the next few days. Again, pretty overwhelming, but if you spot something you might be interested in, you can find the agenda, the live stream link, the information of that committee kind of all in one spot. Look it up and use it when you have time. For the House, they have, so for the Senate, if you see something on the Senate agenda you might be interested in, when you click on live stream link, you'll be taken to a website that at the very top shows you options on how to comment. The House has a separate website altogether because they're a little bit more complicated. So if you go to hodspeak.house.virginia.gov, this is going to be the portal you use in order to offer testimony or to provide written comments. So we'll try that right now. Agriculture, Chesapeake, and Natural Resources. These are all of the bills that have currently ended up within that committee. And we know from talking to Delegate Carr today that her bill is headed that way, tomorrow. Let's just click on that. And this is how we can offer comments. So I'll just type in my name, type in our town, make sure they know we're from JRA, and I prepared some comments that hopefully are under the character limit. So just type those in, submit comments, and they're done, they're in. If I want to see what other people have said, I can see all of the other comments that have been put in. So there we are at the top. Other folks have commented on some other bills. And friends of ours from Virginia Conservation Network and Environment Virginia, they're fast at work as well. So those are 3 resources if you really want to be a go-getter and do this advocacy work on your own, self-starter. And we'll make sure to share these links as well after the webinar. But all of that is a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. And if it's not your job, like it's my job, then the simplest way to get involved is to join some of our programs that make sure to alert you when things are coming up. So the easiest thing to do is to join our advocacy network. When you're part of our network, we will send you an email alert when a critical action is needed to protect the James River. So that means an important bill is coming up for a vote, or the budget negotiations are happening and we need to reach the negotiators. If you open the email alert we send you and take the action inside, you help us show that constituents are paying attention to that moment. But as Delegate Carr said, you want to personalize it. So we usually give you the opportunity to change the subject line, to change the message, to really put your personal touch on what you're sending. But if you enjoyed hearing, the ins and outs of the GA and you want to be more in the loop and more active, you can take a deeper dive with our River Reps program. So our River Reps, many of whom are on the call today, are self-directed individuals that want to actively advocate for clean water. We'll help you identify some of the solutions and problems that are facing the river, and we'll teach you how to share the message. We'll hold periodic calls that update you on what's happening, and then we ask you to take 3 actions on your own to advance policies for the James. So if you want to get involved, I encourage you to follow the link at the top and decide how you want to be involved. Sign up for the Action Network, sign up to be a River Rep, sign up for both, and keep in touch with us as we get through this session together. Tell your story. As Delegate Carr said, the most important thing you can do is make your message personal and share with legislators why the James River matters to you, why clean water matters to you. So I'll just leave you with our contact information because we've hit 6 o'clock, a little sooner than I hoped. Feel free to reach out. Like I said, we'll follow up with some of the links that I just ran through really quickly. But if you have any questions, happy to stick around for a few more minutes and chat about anything we just covered.
Hey, Anna, there is one question from Pixie. Can you give us priorities to help your efforts, i.e. build more support for top priorities?
Yeah, I think priority-wise, focusing on our funding asks is always going to be top of mind. In the way of kind of helping the effort, usually it is helping us contact legislators with the message. Particularly if they're your legislator. So we really need help making sure that we encourage constituents to reach out, because that is what they pay attention to more. I can send an email to the chair of a committee, and it carries a bit of weight because I have JRA behind my name. But if you're that chairperson's constituent, you might get the meeting quicker because they know that you're paying attention and you're communicating with your community about what they're doing. And that makes a difference. So I would say that's probably the top thing we can ask.
Thank you all for all you do.
I appreciate that. And we really rely on our volunteers. All right. Well, thank you all. This is a kind way to share your Tuesday evening, and looking forward to working with you all and seeing your names pop up on the testimony sheets in the coming days.